Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Almassian. Please let me know if my voice is sounding clear in the description below. I would really appreciate that. I can see your comments, and some of you already asking me to put the link of this live stream on Rumble in the description below. It is already, guys, in the description below, and also it is pinned in the live chat. So do me a great service and also follow me on Rumble when you're leaving this live stream, or before that. That would be great, because on YouTube they are really coming after the independent journalists in order first to they are demonetizing their channels, and then they are deplatforming them. So this is my main source, guys, of work. This is where I put most of my work on YouTube and Rumble, and also it is my job to present the facts, both sides of the stories, to you, so that you can make up your mind about difficult, I would say, geopolitical issues, one of which is what is happening now in Palestine. And in the second segment of this video, I will speak a little bit about Ukraine, because it seems that people forgot about Ukraine after what happened in Palestine. And lastly, I will show you a recent interview that I did about Syria, and how the United States and Israel are threatening Syria with bombing Damascus and possibly assassinating President Assad. Now, on Saturday, I went to a demo here in Berlin, and this demo was calling for peace in Palestine and ceasefire in Palestine. And I walked with thousands of people. In my estimates, the numbers are above 10,000 people. Lots of people showed up, and in my opinion, the demos of the let's say, who are calling for peace in Palestine, they are really diverse. So this is something that I want to shed light on. The crowd are very diverse. Of course, there are people from Arabic countries, from Islamic countries, but also there were so many Germans, many Europeans, different backgrounds, different skin of colors. They were very diverse. You know me for quite some time. I don't play identity politics. However, when I say diverse, I mean with different political backgrounds, with different upbringings, people who were not born in the Middle East, but they care about the Palestinian cause. Also, I interacted with Jewish people in these demos. I also took photos of some of the Jewish people who were coming to say not in our name, and we don't agree of what the Israeli government is doing. This is only four photos I uploaded on my X account, and was really funny in my opinion. Banner Habibis against Bibi, and this woman, I found her on Instagram actually, and she was getting arrested by the police and asked questions. This was 2 weeks ago because she was holding this banner and standing in the middle of one of the streets in, I think, in Hermannplatz, and the same banner exactly. And she was arrested by back then and interrogated or asked to leave the scene because they considered this a protest. Although one person alone with a banner, it's not a protest. When it's two people, then it's a gathering. So I salute this woman also who was there, and she raises this banner. And then some of the Palestinian or pro-Palestinian activists, they were sticking these stickers on the police cars, and it says "Free Palestine." And lastly, of course, this is this is my wife. She is calling for ceasefire now in Palestine. I found it really interesting that the demonstrators were mostly from a left-wing background. And I want to mention this quite clearly. In the past few years, I was criticizing the left wing harshly, as you may know, not because I'm not left wing. I was born and raised in a left wing family, but because, in my opinion, the left lost its path in so many things, including, for example, what they prioritized different things. For example, the identity politics, the gender ideology, and also in Ukraine, lots of them were standing on the wrong side. This is my opinion, as I criticize them. But now on the Palestinian issue, they're standing on the correct path, on the correct side. This is also my opinion. And a lot of people in the last years, they thought I'm a right-wing person. I'm not a right-wing person. I'm a person who stands with whoever is standing on the right path. I don't care about left, right-wing politics. Those are all two divide and conquer strategies in the societies in order to divide the society into vertical lines and try to subjugate them and control them as much as they can. So I said many times, when the right is right, I'm on the right side. When the left is right, I'm on the left side. And when the centrists are correct, then I'm on the center. I don't play this left and right wing politics, and I don't buy that it is important for me to accept one political ideology and adopt it into all my political views on different cases. As you can see nowadays, many of these right-wing activists who were calling for peace, who were calling for ceasefire in Ukraine and saying, why are we sending all these weapons to Ukraine? And now those are the people supporting the Israeli onslaught against Gaza. So make it make sense, right? Personally, I'm not a right wing, I'm not a left wing. I just see from my moral point of view, from my moral stand, and I see from the geopolitical point of view where I should stand for the good of the general public and the most of the people, and then I decide on whose side I'm going to be. My position is quite clear. I'm for dignified lives for the Palestinians. I'm for statehood for the Palestinians. And I think that's a very reasonable position for anyone to hold. And unfortunately, Palestinians do not enjoy a dignified life, and they are oppressed for decades. Therefore, I also try to bring their voices to the outside world, to the people who are living in Europe and in the United States. Most of my followers are from these countries, so I want to shed light and try to tell them that, as someone coming from the Middle East, as someone who is Christian, and not like I'm not even ideologically or religiously, let's say, involved in this, although Christians, Palestine is also very important for the Christians, but because some of the Islamic groups they use religion in order to mobilize their ranks, I don't. I don't motivate myself and I don't stand on a religious ground. I stand on a humanitarian ground, and that's why I try to help the Palestinians and share their voices. And this is the least thing I could do in this regard. Now, because these demos that happening around the world for the for the Palestinian issue, as I told you, they're mostly from the left wing. They're mostly they have multi background. Their backgrounds are different. Unlike the Israeli demos, you can see that they are mostly from white European backgrounds, and they are supporting the Israeli side. And funny enough, on the demo day, I saw some of the flags of the Syrian revolution, and some people were holding the flags of the Syrian revolution, and that's very ironic because Israel and the so-called Syrian opposition and the Syrian revolutionaries, quote unquote, are on the same side. Israel gave them cash money. They treated their wounded fighters in the Israeli hospitals, and Israel bombed Syria over 500 times in the past 12 years. And all of these strikes were against the Syrian government positions. None of them were against the Syrian opposition positions. So anyways, I just wanted to make this introduction to tell you what happened during the demo day. It was really good. And because this scene is being now overrun by the left wing people, the Israeli side is unhappy about it. And one of their comedy shows, they made a video about the left-wing scene in Europe and those who are supporting the Palestinian cause, and they are making a mockery of them. So I want to show you what the Israeli side thinks of the left-wing scene now in Europe. And to be honest with you, not all left-wing people look like this, but they're just trying to mock the LGBTQ plus community by creating this video. Let's take a look together.
Everyone, we are live on YouTube with Colombia Anti-Semitic News, where everyone is welcome. LGBTQH.
H?
Hamas.
Yeah, I totally sim Hamas.
Yeah.
It's so trending right now.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Do you know why it's true? Because it rhymes. Just look at all this toxic Zionist propaganda. Kidnapped in Gaza. Does this look like Gaza to you?
Yeah, but I have no idea what Gaza looks like.
And they're smiling. Do hostages smile? Zionist liars.
Totally sus.
Do they think we're stupid?
Stupid? I major in queer post-colonial astrology. Ew. Jews make the world dirty.
Yeah.
And no, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm racist fluid.
Exactly.
I mean, look, this is something that I want to shed light on. Why? Because first of all, they are summarizing the entire left-wing scene, of course, with the LGBTQ plus whatever the community, which I have been critical of for a long time. Secondly, they're relating between their opposition to the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories to racism and anti-Semitism. At the beginning of the video, as you can see, it's they say it's a Colombia anti-Semity. And secondly, they are equating between the opposition to the Israeli occupation with the anti-Semitism. This is very controversial thing to say, and this is very simplistic way of painting the Palestinian cause. Lots of people are opposing the Israeli side because Israel is actually not giving the Palestinians any right to have a dignity, any right to have a state. And this is something under international law. International law is clear that the Palestinians have the right for statehood, and there are resolutions after resolutions calling on Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories. So trying to dismiss the entire left-wing scene in Europe or in the United States and try to paint them all with the blue hair or the pink hair people. I mean, look, I've been, very critical of them. And at the same time, I said, as long as they keep their ideas for themselves and they don't try to choke our kids and try to tell us how we have to live, then I'm fine, right? Just stick with your ideas and with your ideologies. Don't come and indoctrinate me or force your ideas upon me. But the Israelis are doing the same now. the side that they're criticizing, this so-called left-wing scene in Europe, that they call them anti-Semites or trying to force their ideology on the others, etc., etc. Israel is doing the same. They're going after people, they're canceling them, they are framing them as anti-Semites just because they are criticizing Israel's policies and dehumanization of the Palestinians. Let's continue.
And now for a little break from all this activism, we want to say hello to our BFF,
Bestie freedom fighter.
Abu Fatwa in Gaza. Salam alaikum.
Alaykum as-salam, and inshallah, Allah will kill you all infidels.
I mean, look, I've been following, for example, Hamas, Jihad, Hezbollah, all these groups in Palestine and Lebanon. They do not use these terminologies, for example, infidel. This is a terminology of ISIS and Al Qaeda. And as long as they are trying to equate between Hamas and ISIS, they will use the same methodology and the same literature of ISIS and say that Hamas is saying it. Look, I know Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood group, it's an Islamic group, but it is not it's not ISIS, it's not Al Qaeda. Hamas and ISIS were enemies together, and Hamas has been cracked downing on any elements of ISIS inside of the Gaza Strip, and they banned them from operating or trying to spread their ideology there. But this is an issue that, I mean, how can you explain the, let's say, most of the people, or how can you explain the ordinary people that there are differences between different Islamist groups? This is very difficult to do because most of the people are so propagandized and they watch their TV channels or simply they hear the news. The other day I was in a market and then the news came from the radio and it's like, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and today we bring you the latest news. We start with the Israeli and the Palestinian conflict. So as you may know, that the Israeli side is resorting to its self-defense and they're fighting against the terrorist Islamic group of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and at the same time the Egyptians allowed some humanitarian aid, and the Israeli side also is giving a green light for this humanitarian aid in order to relieve the pain of the Palestinians there who have nothing to do with Hamas, blah, 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 blah. And then nothing is mentioned about the bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Nothing is mentioned about the death toll and how many civilians died and how many of these civilians are actually kids, right? Because around 40 to 45% of the casualties in the Gaza Strip are children, around 20 to 30% are women, and 10% are elderly. They don't mention these things because the moment they mention the death toll, people will know that there is something wrong going on there. People have no time in Europe. I live in Germany. People wake up very early, they go to their jobs, they have to catch their trains and go to the job arrive there in 1 hour, and then they have 1 hour back to home. They arrive home 6, 7 at night, they're very tired, they sit a little bit with their kids, eat something, probably open the TV for an hour or two, get tired and sleep. They don't have the time and the privilege to double check every information out there unless someone is already an activist, already involved in politics, and already involved in public affairs, the public life. And even then, lots of people also, they are pro-Israeli because they're opportunists. And it's very easy to advance in your career when you're pro-Israel, right? Like even if it's not easy to advance, it is hard to advance in your career if you are not pro-Israel, right? Or if you're critical of Israel. That's very difficult. As was the case a few years ago in Germany, when you were pro-Assad, for example, you would have been framed, you would have been smeared. It happened with me. And I lost a lot of things because of that. Job opportunities, a scholarship, and it's a very toxic environment if you are trying to walk against the tide, right? And there are certain lines that have been drawn and you cannot cross these lines, otherwise they will come after you and they will smear you, they will do character assassination, and then you will not even find a job to begin with, because anyone who goes to Google and types your name, and then you will see that, oh my god, this guy is a radical person, or he has done this and that, and he's controversial, right? And if you go to Google and see, the HR, for example, is going to hire this guy, they don't want to hire someone who is controversial, especially when it comes to non-governmental organizations, in public life, in media, etc., etc. Also, when you want to give someone a scholarship. And one day, there will come a one day, and that day, inshallah, is very soon, when I am free to speak, and I will tell you lots of things that happened with me in the past in Germany. It will blow your mind, guys. The amount of attacks, the amount of pressure that they put upon me in the past years just to silence me, it's enormous. No normal person, in my opinion, can tolerate that much of pressure. Lots of people told me if I were in your place, I would have collapsed, and I have collapsed at some time. My mental health deteriorated, but I stood firm on my feet because I had no chance but to fight back. If you don't fight back, then you lose. But if you fight back, you always have an percentage to succeed. And see, in 2023, between 2019, I was very, very mentally unwell till 2021. And now in 2022 and 2023, I gathered myself and I'm like, see, I'm back and I'm presenting even material that is way better than what I used to do in the past. So I'm not trying to give myself compliments, but I'm trying to encourage the people that when you are honest with your audience and when you are honest with your reporting, people can see through this truth, and they can also feel like you are being truthful in this regard. So today's video is also about this Israeli minister who called for using nuclear weapons. This is from the Times of Israel. I'm not bringing anything from Palestinian newspapers. Far-right minister says nuking Gaza an option, and Prime Minister Netanyahu suspended him from cabinet meetings. Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu said Saturday that one of Israel's options in the war against Hamas could be to drop a nuclear bomb on the Gaza Strip. Eliyahu, a member of National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's far-right Otzma Yehudit Jewish Power Party. So he's from the party of National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. That guy is a far-right, and their party called Jewish Power. He says, quote, "Your expectation is that tomorrow morning we will drop that amount to some kind of nuclear bomb on all of Gaza, flattening them, eliminating everyone there," the radio Kol Berama interviewer said. When it was pointed out to the minister that there are some 240 hostages currently held in the Gaza Strip, Eliyahu doubled down. He said, quote, "I pray and hope for their return, but there is a price to be paid in war." He added, "Why are the lives of the abductees whose release I really want more important than the lives of the soldiers and the people who will be murdered later?" Quote ended. He later said, Elia also voiced objection to allowing any humanitarian aid into Gaza, saying we wouldn't hand the Nazis humanitarian aid, and charging that, quote, "there is no such thing as uninvolved civilians in Gaza." He also backed retaking the Gaza Strip and rebuilding the Israeli settlements that existed there before Israel withdrew from the area unilaterally in 2005. And when asked about the fate of the Palestinian population, he said they can go to Ireland or deserts. The monsters in Gaza should find a solution by themselves. I mean, I cannot really count how many monstrous things he said in this very short interview. He said that nuking Gaza Strip is on the table, and he said that he wants to see the Gaza Strip flattened. And then he said that the Palestinians, should leave and go to the desert or to Ireland. Imagine that. And by the way, speaking of Ireland, because the Irish people are very pro-Palestine, there are some Irish citizens in the Gaza Strip, and Israel is banning. I don't know how they're doing that, but probably in cooperation with the Egyptian side, they're banning the Irish citizens to leave the Gaza Strip because the foreign citizens, like from the United States, from the UK, from Germany, if they're stuck there, they're being evacuated through the Rafah border crossing. But the Irish are not allowed. Imagine that. So if they're doing this to the Irish people, what are they doing to the Palestinian people, right? And he also said that humanitarian aid should not be sent to the Gaza Strip because he equates them with the Nazis. I mean, look, if we dig into this rabbit hole, bro, like tete a tete, if we put what the Palestinians did and what the Israelis did under the Zionist government, I don't think this will be a match. And whatever I say after this, I could put myself in a big trouble since I'm living in Germany. So you know what I mean in this regard. Now, guys, there are governments in the Middle East that are somehow friendly. Others are they don't let's say object normalizing relations with Israel, and one of which is Saudi Arabia, and the other is the Emirates. And both of these ministries of the foreign affairs of these countries, they issued statement of condemnation. Saudi Arabia condemns in the strongest terms possible the, let's see here, yeah, Saudi Arabia condemns in the strongest terms possible the extremist remarks by an Israeli occupation government minister regarding dropping a nuclear bomb on the besieged Gaza Strip, which show the pervasiveness of extremism and brutality among members of the Israeli government. So, this is coming from the Saudi government. They call Israel an occupation government, and this Israeli minister, they call him a radical extremist. And Saudi Arabia was one step away from normalizing relations with the Israeli side, but it seems there is a consensus in Saudi Arabia that this normalization would never happen unless this radical government, far right government, leaves, headed by Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu looks like a liberal compared to the ministers in his cabinet, especially from the far right side. And at the same time, the Saudis also believe that the Palestinians should have a state. So, a state for the Palestinians and the, let's say, the elimination of this radical extremist government in Israel, I would say those are the preconditions of the Saudi side to normalize relations with Israel. And now that these statements are coming to nuke the Gaza Strip, even Saudi Arabia and the UAE are condemning these statements. Now, because all the time we watch these so-called pundits, the ministers, and lots of people in Israel, or those who are supporting Israel, they keep repeating the same thing over and over again, that why the Arabic countries aren't taking in the Palestinians. And I told you there are 500,000 Palestinian refugees in Syria, between 200 and 500,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, 2 million Palestinian refugees in Jordan. There are refugees from Palestine in Egypt. All Arabic countries received a lot of Palestinian refugees. So I don't understand what's the limit here. How many Palestinian refugees they want the Arabic countries to receive? In my opinion, they want the Arabic countries to receive all Palestinian refugees, all of them. 2.2 million now from the Gaza Strip to Egypt, and then they will try to ethnically cleanse slowly but surely through the settlements and taking over the Palestinian lands, grabbing these lands slowly, and kicking the 3 million Palestinians from the 3.5 million Palestinians also from West Bank. This is the plan. This is my opinion. This is what I'm hearing from the Israeli government. This is what I'm hearing from the Israeli officials. This is what I'm hearing from lots of so-called pundits who are pro-Israel. And one of these people the other day was on Russia Today, and he repeats the similar narrative here. Best response to the Zionist propaganda line: why don't the neighboring Arab countries want the Palestinians? Norman Finkelstein, who is a Jewish professor and his parents survived the Auschwitz, he says, you're smiling, but your stupid smirk won't change the fact that the argument you used was used by Hitler to justify the extermination of the Jews. Let's take a look together what Norman Finkelstein said. I had to blur the Russia Today logo, guys, because YouTube has some sort of an artificial intelligence, and they detect the videos when there is the logo of Russia Today and take down your entire video. So I wanted to avoid that, but all the credit goes to Russia Today, and this interview happened on Russia Today. Let's take a look.
Yeah. Why does not one country in the entire Arab world not want to help their brothers and take them in, spread them out? You don't want them in Egypt. You don't want them in Jordan. You don't want them in Syria. You don't want them in Saudi Arabia. There's a million countries. Spread them out. Nobody wants to help them. Why?
This is a difficult. I'll tell you what. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you.
I'll answer in one simple sentence.
Make your point. Make your point. But we're going to.
Why did any of the European countries or the United States want Jews before the Nazi Holocaust? Maybe the Jews were like the Palestinians. They were so horrible. They were so vicious. They were so bestial, or as the current Israeli government calls them, human animals. Maybe that's why none of the European countries and the United States didn't want them. Do you think that's the reason?
This is not easy. This is not easy, but we're going to have to...
Curious.
Gentlemen...
You think that's the reason you're smiling, but your stupid smirk won't change the fact that the very argument you used was used by Hitler.
Sir?
Yeah, the same argument you used was used by Hitler to justify the extermination of the Jews.
Gentlemen...
Your argument was used by Hitler to justify the extermination of the Jews. Nobody.
What's my argument?
Nobody wants them because they're so terrible and so horrible. You're a Nazi speaking now in those kinds of arguments.
This has become very contentious. We're going to take a break. I want to thank you both.
Not on my
part. I want to thank Dr. Norman Finkelstein, as well as Steve Malzberg, for this very passionate and, as you can see, very...
So, according to Norman Finkelstein, whose parents survived the Holocaust in Auschwitz, that this is a Nazi talking point, right? And the way the other guest was smiling like a clownish way, right? And he knows quite well that the Palestinians have a unique geography. They lived in Palestine. They have their culture. We in Syria, we always have some differences from the Palestinians. Palestinians have unique, for example, culture. They have a music. They have an accent. They have they have a lots of things that we don't have in Syria. Arabic countries are not like one piece of land that that everyone is the same. And rest assured, if this person now who generalizes and says like, oh, why other Arabic countries don't receive them, when other Arabic countries say, okay, let's unite and create one unified Arabic country, he will be the first one who oppose it because they don't want for the Arabs to be unified, right? Yeah, this is an argument that was used by the Nazis in the past to kick out the Jews from Europe. And this anti-Semitism, guys, I will be very honest with you. This is not our problem in the region, right? This is not our problem in Syria. This is not our problem in Palestine. This is not our problem in Iraq. This is not our problem in Egypt. Like myself, I didn't know what anti-Semitism is until I was probably 18 to 20 years old. We never speak badly about the Jewish people. We do not want to discriminate against the Jewish people. The problem in the Middle East with the Jewish people started after the creation of Israel as an ethno-religious state. Before that, the Jews were living in peace in Palestine. They were living in peace in Syria. They were living in peace in Iraq. They were Iraqis. They were Lebanese. They were Syrians. They weren't targeted into a Holocaust. Holocaust happened in Europe. And I was watching the other day Bassem Youssef, the Egyptian comedian, again on, what was the name of this journalist? Piers Morgan. He invited him for the second time. He traveled to the United States to meet with him and spoke to him. And there is a segment, it's a 5-minute segment, guys, that it's mind-blowing how a comedian, Egyptian comedian, can explain the root cause of anti-Semitism and how it happened, and then how the Europeans exported this problem to the Middle East and how they projected it on us and started calling the people in the Middle East anti-Semites for trying to protect their land, trying to protect their farm from Europeans. Look, there is another thing I want to mention here. Lots of Jewish people who used to live in Palestine 3,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, etc., when the Arabic conquerors came, Islamic conquerors came, they didn't kill the Jewish people. They didn't exterminate the Jewish people. And they didn't exterminate the Christian people. They gave them, like any other conquerors in the past, it was different rules, right? Different rules of engagement. Yes, they were more savage in the past than now. Although we can argue about that and say now also similar savagery. But in the past, for example, when the Islamic conquerors came to Palestine, they said, okay, you either convert to Islam or you can stay in your religion, but you pay more taxes. And if you pay more taxes, these taxes mean that you do not serve in the military. We fight in the military, the Muslims, and we defend you, but you have to pay extra taxes. And lots of Jewish people, lots of Christian people, out of pragmatism, they converted to Islam because they didn't want to pay big taxes, because most of the people were not rich, right? So this was the situation back then. So the current Palestinians in Palestine, many of them are probably the descendants of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people in the past who converted and became Muslims or probably Christians, I don't know, they are still living in Palestine. And nowadays, they are getting killed by the Zionists. So I would argue that the Zionist government is probably also anti-Semitic. They are killing their ancestors in Palestine, those who converted. And lots of the current, let's say, establishment in Israel, they're not descendants of these Jews. They came from Russia, they came from Ukraine, they came from Poland, they came from Germany, and all around the world. They came to Palestine, right? And those are the people who are in charge of the power now. So I would argue that Israel is probably now killing the descendants of the Jewish ancestors who converted in the past. So the original Jews who converted in the past, and they became either Christians or Muslims, and those are now getting killed in Palestine. And now I will show you this video about anti-Semitism and the problem with anti-Semitism in Europe, and how it is not the problem of the Middle East, but it's the problem of Europe, but then they exported it to the Middle East. Let's take a look together.
This is a map of all of the history of the expulsion of the Jews in Europe. They've been like, I have never seen a minority being kicked around this much, right? And of course, this comes back to the whole idea about the original sin, that you have betrayed Jesus Christ. The blood of Jesus is on your hands. Then comes the 11th century. At that time, Jewish people were not allowed to own land. They were just peasants. Even some of the professions were not even allowed to participate in. But they were allowed to do one thing: usury, money lending, because it was prohibited by the Catholic Church to engage into that. So what happens when you work in money? You get richer, right? And those Jews lived in ghettos. Now, ghettos was not just like isolated neighborhoods in cities. Sometimes ghettos were outside the cities. This is like how isolated they were. And in those ghettos, they have to pay gold to the mayor or the governor or the prince or the noble. So they would see, you're getting richer. I need more taxes. So they pay tax. What happens when you have a business and they increase your rent? You increase your service, increase the taxes, increase the service. So what happened? The Christians started to default. And suddenly, the image of the greedy Jew was created. This was created because of their conditions. And it became worse in 1095, when Pope Urban II called for the first crusade to go and save the birth of Jesus from the unbelievers Muslim. And this crusade did not kill a single Muslim. You know how many people they killed? 2,000 Jews. Because it's like, wait, the non-believers are all over there. Why? So they went to it's called the Crusades of the Rhineland. So they went to the Jewish community because, hey, we own the money, so let's kill them better than paying them. And then came the plague. And then all of the things like, oh, they're killing babies, who would do that to a baby, And they accused them of poisoning the well. This was the kind of oppression that the Jewish people went through. Fast forward 19th century, there was like the Eastern Jew in Ukraine and Russia, and there was the Western Jews in Europe. Those people in the East, the Eastern Jews, had to immigrate because of pogroms, and they were like, kicked out. And at a certain point, the people in the West, especially in England, it's like, there are too many Jews. We need a solution. A solution for what? For the Jewish problem. So it's like we need to get rid of them. And you know what? Palestine was not even on the A list. Palestine was on the B list. Because England proposed 6,000 square miles in Uganda for the Jews, 1903. And the reason why Palestine was not on the list, that it was objected by a lot of rabbis that said, like, it's a promised land, but only when the Messiah comes. But there were other options: Argentina, South Africa, Uganda, Madagascar. And eventually they said, all right, let's do Palestine. So they went to Palestine in 1914. There was 700,000 people living in Palestine. 3% were Jewish. 1917, Balfour Declaration. Arthur Balfour, he called the Jewish people in England that they are alien and hostile race. And the thing is, the only Jewish member of the parliament, of the English parliament, Lord Montenegro, he objected, said, like, these are British citizens, we should not kick them out. So they pushed them, but it was not going fast enough. Came the Nazis. And then it was not about the solution anymore. It was the end losing, the final solution by Hitler, because he needed an answer for the Jewish question, the Judefrage. And then, as you see, the Holocaust happened, the most orchestrated, industrialized, horrible genocide in our modern time. 6 million Jews died. So it accelerated, and they went. First of all, they left East Europe, and they went to West Europe, and they went to America, and they were turned down, and they were pushed towards Palestine. So by 1948, right before the declaration of the State of Israel, there were 2 million people living there. Only 30% of them was Jews. So the whole idea of like a land without a people to a people without a land was a marketing thing. They were already Palestinians. So suddenly, from our perspective, the Jewish problem is not a Jewish problem, is not a Middle Eastern problem, is not an Arab problem, it is a European problem. It was pushed on us together with the guilt, because now we are the anti-Semite. Now we are the Jewish hater. And not just that, they took land. And suddenly this was like a conflict, a hate, a problem that we didn't have to do anything with. This was basically pushed on us by the Europeans. You see, this is why it is important to say that. And I'm not saying that just like, let's wipe out the State of Israel, let's like push them in the sea. No, but it's important when you talk about the conflict, that you talk about the root causes. Right? No, there was like a vibrant Palestinian culture happening over there. And right now they are erasing this culture. Suddenly I'm thinking of like Israeli feta cheese, Israeli hummus. Oh, that's an insult. Israeli hummus. Come on. I mean, take the land, but leave the hummus, man. I mean, come on. I mean, that's not fair. You are someone who's always spoken against culture, cancel culture. Right now, a whole culture is canceled.
So, a comedian from Egypt, who is, by the way, a very liberal person and hated by the Islamists in the Middle East, and especially in Egypt, whose entire show began in 2011 by mocking the Islamists and the Muslim Brotherhood, is presenting an alternative point of view, a point of view that probably is not heard a lot in Europe and in the United States, for those who want to enlighten themselves and understand that probably this Jewish problem is not a Jewish problem. It's not a Middle Eastern problem. It's not an Arabic problem. It's been pushed by the Europeans on the Middle East, and with the guilt, right, and also the accusations of the anti-Semitism. Now that after 75 years of occupation and hatred between, lots of things happened. Israelis committed crimes, Palestinians committed crimes, and everything. If you take this entire timeline, you will see also the Palestinians committed probably crimes and heinous crimes against the Israelis or the Jewish people. But the root cause of it wasn't that the Palestinians used to hate the Jewish people. Never was the case. This was exported from Europe to the Middle East, and especially to Palestine. And Palestine, as Bassem Youssef said, was not even the number one option for the Brits, who created or promised a nation state for the Jewish people in Palestine, right? Uganda was the first option. And the rabbis, there are so many rabbis and ultra-Orthodox, let's say, Jews, who say that we don't have the right to be now in Palestine. We have to wait for the Messiah to come, and then this is a promised land of ours. But it happened. So whatever it is happening there now, it's always important, guys, to speak about the root cause of this conflict. Otherwise, if you don't contextualize the issue, then it will just look like you are presenting a point of view that is twisted and it doesn't make sense for lots of people, and then they will accuse you of anti-Semitism, as it is the case all the time. Now I will show you a short video of why I'm showing this video, because I want to speak about a little bit of the American politics. And in the past few years, I was astonished by how many people I know in the United States from the left and from the imperialism scene who were cheering and cherishing for Bernie Sanders. And I was always telling them, like, for me, I can see this guy and I'm highly confident that he's a controlled opposition. People like Bernie Sanders, they give the impression that there is a democracy in the United States. And there are different opinions within one political party, and that is the Democratic Party. But there is no way for Bernie Sanders or anyone like him can reach to power and stay in this position for years and years and years unless he is under the control of the establishment. And I want from you guys, if you're an American, to tell me one achievement that Bernie Sanders did for the workers and the working class in the United States, because he calls himself a socialist. And I want you to tell me one achievement Bernie Sanders did by opposing a war or stopping a war or voting against a war. He voted for sending billions of dollars worth of weaponry to Ukraine. He opposed ceasefire in Ukraine. And now he is also objecting a ceasefire in Palestine, in Gaza. Let's take a look.
I want to just clarify one thing, Senator, if I might. You support a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Some of your fellow progressives say that there should be a full-on ceasefire, which would require an agreement on both sides to halt the fighting. Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turmoil and chaos and destroying the state of Israel. And I think what the Arab countries in the region understand, that Hamas has got to go.
So Bernie Sanders, apparently he is for pausing the conflict in the Gaza Strip, probably for a few days, so that they allow some humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, but not for a ceasefire. So practically speaking, Bernie Sanders, when he objects a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, he is giving the green light for Israel to continue this operation or postpone it for a few days or 2 weeks or etc. But the end game is the same. If you are for pausing the conflict but not for a ceasefire, that means you are okay with Israel ethnically cleansing the Palestinians, which is declared by the Israeli officials over and over again. They say it all the time. This is not a conspiracy theory. So yeah, I think Bernie Sanders is a very hypocritical politician. He gained lots of voices in the past from the working class, pretending to care about them, from the anti-war movement, and now the anti-war movement, big names on X and Twitter, they're bashing him, and I think he will become more and more allied with the establishment, more and closer and closer to Israel, because he's losing the popular ground. He's losing the people who voted for him, who funded him. So he will need funding also for his electoral campaign in the next years, and therefore he will become closer to the American establishment and closer to Israel. And as you know, guys, the AIPAC, American Israeli committee, they fund the congressmen and congresswomen, right? I mean, it's an open. It's not even a secret. It's very open knowledge for everyone. So yeah, lots of congressmen and congresswomen, they come under the influence of Israel because they cannot secure any funding or enough funding to continue their electoral campaign. Jeffrey Sachs, I mentioned him a few times already on this channel. He wrote a brilliant article. I'm not going to read all of it, but he is arguing that Israel's chance to turn carnage into peace. He says, Israel is running out of time to save itself, not from Hamas, which lacks the means to defeat Israel militarily, but from itself. Israel's war crimes in Gaza, verging on the crime of genocide, according to the Center for Constitutional Rights, threaten to destroy Israel's civil, political, economic, and cultural relations with the rest of the world. There are growing calls in Israel for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resign immediately. A new Israeli government should seize the opportunity to turn the carnage into lasting peace through diplomacy. I'm not sure about you guys, but this is, in my opinion, a wishful thinking that if Benjamin Netanyahu is gone, or if a so-called left-wing government comes to power in Israel, suddenly everything will change, and suddenly Ishaq Rabin will come back to life, and he will pursue peace with the Palestinians. I think the Israeli side has reached to a point of no return when it comes to the peace agreement with the Palestinians. They have reached to a point of constructing all these settlements on the West Bank that it has become virtually impossible to dismantle all these settlements and give back the territories that they occupied after the 4th of June 1967 war. So Netanyahu is leading Israel into the same trap that the US fell into after 9/11. Hamas' goal in its heinous terrorist attack on the 7th of October was to goad Israel into a long and bloody war and to induce Israel to commit war crimes to bring on the world's opprobrium. This is a classic political use of terror, not merely to kill, but to frighten, provoke, debase, and ultimately undermine the foe. Look, I'm not going to echo what he said. I'm not going to argue what every terminology that he used, but in the broader context, Hamas's attack against Israel was also meant, like one of the goals was to provoke Israel to commit heinous crimes in the Gaza Strip, to bomb discriminately the Gaza Strip, to try to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians there. This has led into huge backlash internationally. And as you can see, a lot of people, guys, are waking up to the fact that for the first time, that Israel is probably on the wrong path. And the imagery and the footage that are coming from Gaza Strip, you cannot hide them. And the people, lots of people are good, right? They have the good instincts and they want to help people. And even if they were pro-Israel, when they see all this footage of murdered kids, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old kids are dying every day, over 4,000 of them, it hurts them, right? And they start asking questions. I think Israel has miscalculated in its approach. I think Hamas was successful in provoking Israel into this bloodshed. And now the image of Israel has been tarnished, in my opinion, beyond repair. There is nothing that Israel can do now to polish its reputation and image again. I'm not talking about the brainwashed people. I'm not talking about hardcore Zionists. I'm talking about the general public. And I think Israel has to do a lot now to try to fix that, and I think it's virtually impossible to fix it. Israel's instinct is to ignore global opinion, chalking it up to anti-Semitism and believing that the US has Israel's back. Yet the US, weakened as it is in world affairs, can't possibly save Israel from itself. Just look at how the US is, quote, saving Ukraine. Ukraine is being destroyed by its pursuit of NATO membership and rejection of diplomacy, both of which have been encouraged by America's ineffective pledge to support Ukraine militarily for as long as it takes. You remember, guys, we have been talking about this for quite some time, and we were saying also on Syriana Analysis that there is no way for for the United States to continue supporting Ukraine as long as it takes. And we were arguing that the American administration is using the Ukrainians as cannon fodders, and we were called Putinists, we were called conspiracy theorists. It was quite obvious. The other day I was reading to Kim.com, and he was saying something like, because he came under he was attacked by the American successive administrations, and he was saying like, I'm an expert on evil and I'm just here to warn you. And I want to echo that, and I want to say like, I don't have his experience. I don't have his. I didn't come under attack like him. But as someone coming from Syria and someone who was watching all this war happening in the countries surrounding Syria and in Syria, instigated by the United States, I truly believe I truly believe, guys, that in any geopolitical conflict, if you want to be on the right side, on the correct side, if you want to be morally correct, if you want to be on the humane side, if you choose the opposite side of the United States, you have 90% chance to be on the right side. This is just my opinion. All the time, it's so rare that the American regime, the deep state, the American military industrial complex, the bankers, the billionaires, the oligarchs there who initiate these wars for financial gains, it's virtually impossible for them to be on the right side. And all of the time, they just initiate and start wars and they leave it in the middle of the war. Because for them, the goal was never to win the war. For example, in Afghanistan, as Julian Assange revealed, the war in Afghanistan was never meant to be a win war. It was just meant for an endless war because it was a money laundering operation. And the same thing happened in Ukraine. It was very similar, the circumstances. And we have been warning about that to the Ukrainians. We wanted to tell them and make them understand that they're being used in this conflict between NATO and Russia because these billionaires, they recycle money in Ukraine and they send tens of billions of dollars there. And also the Ukrainian officials have become so much richer because of this. Our voices were not heard. We were called all sorts of names. We were threatened by deplatforming, by demonetization by social media platforms. But now you can see US European officials broach topic of peace negotiations with Ukraine. Sources say US and European officials have begun quietly talking to the Ukrainian government about what possible peace negotiations with Russia might entail to end the war. According to one current senior US official and one former senior US official familiar with the discussions, the conversations have included very broad outlines of what Ukraine might need to give up to reach a deal, the officials said. They began amid concerns among US and European officials that the war has reached a stalemate and about the ability to continue providing aid to Ukraine, officials said. Biden administration officials are also worried that Ukraine is running out of forces while Russia has a seemingly endless supply, the officials said. Ukraine is also struggling with recruiting and has recently seen public protests about some of President Zelensky's open-ended conscription requirements. And there is unease in the US government with how much less public attention the war in Ukraine has garnered since the Israel-Hamas war began nearly a month ago, the officials said. Officials fear that shift could make securing additional aid for Kiev more difficult. I think this article is from MSM. This is from NBC News. Of course, they receive leaked information from US diplomats and US officials. And they want to send messages to Ukraine so that the Ukrainian officials prepare themselves to accept the bitter reality, and that is they cannot defeat a superpower equipped with nuclear weapons like Russia, and that the Americans never gave two single damns about the Ukrainian lives. They didn't give a damn about the Ukrainian sovereignty. If they gave a damn about the Ukrainian sovereignty, they wouldn't have done the coup d'etat in 2014, and they wouldn't have installed a puppet government for the United States. They have kept Ukraine sovereign and let the people choose what path do they want. Do they want the European Union? Do they want the NATO? They had to do their own referendum, but removing a president by coup d'etat and installing a government that is close to you and then changing the laws, regulations, constitution so that you ban any pro-Russian activity, the Russian language, Russian culture, etc. It was quite obvious that you don't want for Ukraine to be independent. So this is where we are right now. This is what we spoke about for the last 2 years, and like I'm really sad for the Ukrainians because I know how the Americans think. They're deep state. They're the people who have a special interest, and especially Joe Biden, who has a special interest also in Ukraine. And now they ruined the economies in Europe. They've completely destroyed Ukraine in the east and in the central governorates, and now they just want to withdraw their hand because of the Israel-Hamas war. And if you remember, in the first two live streamings that I did after this 7th of October, I mentioned something very important, and I said the real question here remains: can the American economy sustain two major wars? Can they fund two major wars? This is the main question, guys. If the Americans can do that, then I would say, okay, they can continue doing that. But they cannot. Their economy cannot sustain. And the proof of that is the hundreds of billions of dollars they are printing out in order to continue this policy and stay hegemon around the world. And it's counterproductive for them because the people in the United States are fed up by paying for foreign wars, and they are gaining nothing from it. If the Americans are gaining some of the privileges and the gains that the billionaires are making after these wars, then I would argue that, okay, the Americans are at least having welfare, at least they're having good education, great campuses, they're not going bankrupt because their sons went to school or college and paid $40,000, $60,000. If somebody who has severe illness, he doesn't need to lend money from someone to go to hospital. There is healthcare, etc. There is none of this, right? So it's time now for recalculation and prioritizing the conflict. And it seems that the Americans have chosen to run after Israel right now, and they're preparing something very big. It seems so. There's going to be more escalation, unfortunately. Hezbollah is also now more further involved in this conflict. And the Israelis yesterday, they bombed a car in southern Lebanon and they killed 3 children, and their mom is in critical conditions. I don't understand what's the point of bombing a civilian car and murdering 3 children and their mom is in critical conditions. What's the military value of it? And the other day when Nasrallah spoke about in his speech, he said that the red line is targeting our civilians and civilian infrastructure. So let's see how the response will be to this aggression on Lebanon. And on the 11th of this month, Nasrallah will speak again, and I will try to again make a video and host experts to analyze this speech. But before that, Zelensky, of course, he heard about these reports and he knows that the Americans have abandoned him. And now he's going on NBC News again, and he is very mad and he's very angry by the current developments. And just listen what he says in this regard.
Before you go, if you want to share, what keeps you going? Do you ever feel defeated?
I have a lot of power, but even feeling strong and have a lot of energy, it doesn't mean that we want to fight all our life, because the price is high, like I said, because the war takes the best of us, the best heroes, the best men, women, children. That's it. But we are not ready to give our freedom to this terrorist Putin. That's it. That's why we are fighting. That's it.
President Zelensky, thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, if Zelensky knew that what the Americans are intending in Ukraine, and he walked on the same direction of the Americans, then he is a traitor, right? And if he didn't know that what the Americans are intending for Ukraine, despite all the warnings, then he is a naive. And in both cases, in my opinion, he is incompetent and he doesn't deserve to be in the presidency. I mean, who am I to ask that? I'm not calling for his removal, but I'm just evaluating his policies, and I think it was disastrous for Ukraine, and they lost hundreds of thousands, probably over 200,000 soldiers. The country is drained. They don't have manpower anymore. The economy is exhausted. Everything is in ruin, and the Ursula von der Leyen and the rest come and just laugh on the Ukrainians and say, "Oh, we're going to include you in the European Union," you know. And what's going to happen if you included them in the European Union, lady? You think that they will become all of a sudden prosperous and all of a sudden everything will be reconstructed? It hurts me to see that there are Ukrainians believing this. Anyways, now I will play, guys, this recent interview I did, the Last American Vagabond did with me about Syria and about the American plan also to hit Syria again after 12 years of regime change war. But before that, I would like to thank you all for tuning in and watching this live streaming. And I would like to appreciate all of you guys for watching and spending time to watch these live streams. It's a really, really, really important to me that you're watching and pushing this video also all around the world by sharing it. And also I appreciate all the people who are supporting Syriana Analysis financially, whether through YouTube or PayPal or Patreon. And if you want to support my independent work like I'm doing right now, you can see the link here on the description, www.patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. It only costs you $2 per month, and it is a great help to me to become 100% independent and spend all of my time preparing a better content to you. Now I will, guys, leave you with the video that I made, this interview with Last American Vagabond. I just wanted to thank Black Tie again for his generous support. He's always generous with me on my live streamings, always supports me on my YouTube channel. I also want to thank Overkill Gaming. He says it's a little known secret that a large chunk of the Palestinians, roughly 85%, were Jews and converted to Islam after the conquest of the Levant. I didn't know about the percentage. I will also double check it, but thank you for this comment and for this information. And now we will move to the last part of this live streaming, and that is this interview that I did with the Last American Vagabond. And I will leave you here, guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the Last American Vagabond. I have a special interview today with Kevork Almassian, the founder of Syriana Analysis, a very intelligent, objective researcher specifically focused on Middle East politics, to discuss an investigation he's been conducting in regard to a possible potential plan to assassinate President Assad in order to, as I understand it, sort of get a political win as we go forward into like election season, or a lot of different interesting reasons around, a lot of the different moving parts going on in the world today. And so I wanted to invite him on to discuss what he sees there, why he thinks that might be happening, and then the logic around it. I'm very fascinated by this. And we all have seen the ongoing occupation of Syria, so it's not that hard to wrap our minds around. So let's get into it. How are you today, Kevork?
I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me, brother. It's a really pleasure to be on your show.
It's good to have you back, man. And I always enjoy our conversations. I really do value your work a lot in this field. So let's get right into it in general. So, I mean, I don't think we need to educate the audience in either side in regard to the history around the Syrian, the illegal U.S. occupation. So where we're at now, obviously, there's a lot of other moving parts in the world and what are going on in particular around the Middle East right now, Israel, Palestine. So go ahead and just start from the beginning on this theory. So where did you first see this, and why do you think this might be happening in regard to the potential assassination of President Assad?
Yes, I just want to give a very quick context about this because it's very important to contextualize the issue so people can grasp the importance of and where this could lead if it happens. So since 2011, the CIA and the Pentagon, they had the covert operation in Syria, Timber Sycamore, and in parallel, there was the Pentagon program to overthrow Assad. Billions of dollars have been poured in Syria through regional countries, and this proxy war that it was initiated by the CIA, it was more like a give and take. Sometimes Syria was winning on the territory, like liberating some of the territories, and sometimes the proxies of the United States. But this has started to change drastically in 2015 when the Russians intervened, and before that, Iranian advisors and Hezbollah fighters. I think up until 2017, the regime change war was on the table. And when Trump came to power, he ended the regime change because of the strong Russian presence in the country and the eradication of most of the US-backed, let's say, proxy groups on the ground. So Trump ended the regime change war in 2017, and he released the information that we need to know about it. And the New York Times says it's one of the costliest covert operation in the history of the CIA, and it was the costliest insurgency in the history of the CIA, right?
Do you mean that financially or personally?
Financially, yes, financially. The former head of the Saudi intelligence, Bandar bin Sultan, who was named, or his, let's say, they used to call him in Washington, D.C., Bandar Bush, because he had very close relationship with the Bush family and also with the neocons. When he came as a head of the intelligence in Saudi Arabia in 2013, he asked for $2 trillion to remove Assad from power. $2 trillion. We're not speaking about billions now. We're speaking trillions. And of course, they couldn't allocate $2 trillion. It's a crazy amount of money. But my estimates, by what we have seen on the ground in Syria, it's around $200 billion. If you compare it to the Ukraine war, Ukraine's size is so much bigger than of Syria. So if you do the calculation, you will see that the amount of weapon that they dumped in Syria, it's way more than they dumped in Ukraine. But all this weaponry went to these radical groups in Syria. And because there is this precedent also of killing Gaddafi and killing Saddam Hussein. So when ISIS was advancing from Palmyra to Damascus, there was a meeting between John Kerry and so-called Syrian opposition figures in Washington, D.C. And someone, we don't know who is that person, someone was recording the conversation apparently in secret. And this tape has been leaked to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks published it online. And we understand now that behind the scenes, the American administration under Obama, they were very happy to see the advance of ISIS to Damascus, and they thought it would be, they are going to practice pressure on Assad for Assad to compromise. This was the idea. But we all know that when ISIS knocked the door of Damascus and they were in El Yarmouk refugee camp, they were firing rockets and mortars on the presidential palace. Then the rockets were falling around the presidential palace where Assad used to work. So if ISIS advanced in Damascus back then, they would have murdered Assad. This was out of question. And this was allowed by the United States because remember, in 2014, the US initiated what it's called the US-led campaign against terrorism or against ISIS. And after this so-called campaign against terrorism, ISIS expanded, dramatically expanded in Syria. So anyways, this was the issue of the regime change has been put on the shelf, and they didn't they gave up on, let's say, militarily to remove Assad in 2017, and Trump imposed draconian sanctions on the Syrian people in the hope that the people will rise this time against Assad. So you suffocate the people, you send 90% of the people below the poverty line, which according to the UN, it is the case. And they were hopeful that the people will rise against Assad and they will remove him from power. Yes, they succeeded partially. Assad, in my opinion, lost some of his popular base after these sanctions because the people are generally expecting from the government to provide the basic necessities. And the government isn't able because the oil and gas fields are occupied by the United States. The wheat is occupied by the United States. And there are draconian sanctions on the country, and all the regional countries are afraid to deal with Syria because even third country companies, those are not related to any government. If you are, let's say, Nestle in Dubai and you want to send milk to Syria, you are unable to send that because the American government will come after you and sanction this company, which is non-governmental, let's say, so.
And I'll add really quickly to that, just so I've made this point many times, and I think even you and I talked about this before, which is that this is in fact it's one point in time, and you could find these documents still, the stated purpose of the sanctions, not to pressure the government. It ultimately is pressuring the government, but it's designed to hurt innocent people, to push them against the government. This has been documented many times. So it just kind of gives you an insight into who these people really are. And to your point about ISIS in general, I think I recently did a watch along with James Corbett on his excellent Al-Qaeda documentary. Ben Swan has done a breakdown of this. It's at your point about why ISIS would go after him. And clearly it's because I think we can prove that it's a proxy army of the West. And I think we need to realize that and not be afraid to state that today. So go ahead.
No, Michael Hudson, he's a very famous professor as well. He says that Al-Qaeda is a contract army for the United States. And we shouldn't be even afraid of mentioning this because facts on the ground speak for itself.
Right.
And I come from Syria, and we've seen who was supporting ISIS and who was supporting Al-Qaeda on the ground. It's not like the United States is telling ISIS, like, let's establish something called ISIS. No, they pave the environment, they prepare the environment, they pave the way for such groups to emerge. And then they dump tens of billions of dollars worth of weaponry in Syria, mostly coming from Libya, Turkey, and from different countries, for example. And you say, we're sending this weaponry to the moderate rebels. You organize something called the Free Syrian Army, and the Free Syrian Army, they start distributing this weaponry to the radical groups, to ISIS, to al-Nusra. And even if they don't distribute it and give it to these more radical groups, let's say, these groups are way more powerful that they will come and take over this weaponry. So, I mean, this stuff are very... it's a common knowledge in Syria. You know, when you speak these things in among, let's say, in front of Western audiences, sometimes they are shocked, but this is the reality. Now, because as I mentioned, the regime change war has been put on the shelf, and they started to impose these draconian sanctions. They thought that they will manage to remove Assad again from power, and this didn't work. And now that with the escalation of the conflict in Palestine, and Syria is an essential part of this conflict, people need to understand that the main reason, the direct reason why they wanted to remove Assad, because Assad refused to sign a so-called peace treaty with Israel for a very long time, himself and his father. And he insisted that the Palestinians have the right for statehood, and insisted that the Palestinian refugees have to return back, and also insisted on armed resistance. And by doing so, he opened all the warehouses, military warehouses of Syrian army to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah managed to bring this weaponry to the Gaza Strip. People need to know that even the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Said Nasrallah, a few years ago, he said that he was meeting with Bashar al-Assad, and he told him that the Cornet rockets that they received from Syria, they want to send it to Gaza. And Assad asked just one question: are you able to do it? And he said, yes, then do it. So now that the Cornet rockets that are being used by Hamas and Jihad in the Gaza Strip, those are from the Syrian warehouses. The Russians they do not give such weaponry to non-state actors. Those come from Syria. That's why they wanted to eradicate, let's say, Assad from power. This is the direct reason. Now, with the escalation of the conflict, as I mentioned, in the Gaza Strip, the Syrians, they have two combat units near the Golan Heights. They prepared them in collaboration with the Iranians and Hezbollah, that if there is a war, a regional war, there are two combat units that they would try to liberate the Golan Heights. This is number one. Now, the Israelis are worried from the intervention of Hezbollah in this conflict. Hezbollah's intervention is a game changer, more than the Syrian intervention, because Hezbollah is a guerrilla army. Their tactics is different from a regular army. In Syria, they can eradicate the air bases, they can eradicate the military bases, but what can they do with Hezbollah? Hezbollah is a militia. They have a city under a city. They have tunnels. They can. I've been in southern Lebanon in one of these bunkers that Hezbollah established, and it was discovered by Israel. So they made it like a museum, and we went there, and it's like tanks can move inside these tunnels, right?
Wow.
So those are very, very big tunnels, city under a city. It's all their electricity. There is air conditioning. There are lights. It's like an entire city. Anyways, so they're afraid of the intervention of Hezbollah, and they said, if Hezbollah intervenes in this conflict, we are going to hit Damascus, and we are going to assassinate Assad. And this was revealed by...
Who's saying that?
This is Israelis sent this letter, this message to Syria and to Hezbollah through the French mediator. And this was revealed by Yedoat Ahranot. And this was also echoed and repeated by the former MI6 agent Alistair Cook in one of his recent interviews, that he heard similar reports as well. Personally, I asked a few of my contacts in Damascus, and they take this let's say, threats with seriously, and they're alarmed, and they're ready for such a scenario in Syria. In Washington D.C., I know this may sound like because they say you have a friend of a friend, but it's a very good contact that I have in America, and this person, he has contacts within the American administration, and he told me that the Americans 2 months ago, even before this conflict in the Gaza Strip, they were considering of getting rid of Assad and finish what they call, quote, unfinished business.
Right.
And why do they want to do that? Because after the failed counteroffensive in Ukraine, it was a huge failure, not for Ukraine. This is not Ukraine's war. This is NATO's and America's war.
Right.
So they consider it in Ukraine a strategic failure from a geopolitical perspective. Financially, they're making money, but geopolitically speaking, Russia won this this round of war, right? So before the next elections in 2024, they want to achieve what they call a strategic victory in the Middle East by removing Assad. So if we put all this information together and all this context together, it makes sense to me that they want to assassinate Assad if Hezbollah intervenes in this conflict, because they want to achieve this strategic victory before the elections, because they can prolong the life of the empire and prove themselves that they are still a hegemon over the global affairs.
Right.
But what if Hezbollah intervenes, Iran intervenes, Syria intervenes, the Yemenis intervene, and this turn into a regional war with global ramifications?
Right.
Remember what Putin said in this regard. Putin gave the order to his aerospace to conduct 24/7 flights over the Black Sea. He gave the order for the MiG-30s to fly 24/7, and those are equipped with hypersonic Kinzhal missiles. Why did Putin gave this order? Putin doesn't like bluff about these issues. We have to take this seriously, because the Americans sent their aircraft carriers to the Mediterranean, accompanied by elite warships and nuclear submarines. Who is going to convince me today that the United States sent all its elite warships to the Mediterranean and nuclear submarines to deter Hezbollah? Hezbollah is a militia. You do not need all these, let's say, fighter jets and all these nuclear arms to deter Hezbollah. This is directed to, in my opinion, to Syria, one. And the second, also possibly against Egypt, because they want to intimidate and blackmail Egypt to receive 2.2 million Palestinians from the Gaza Strip and house them in what Ayalon, the former deputy foreign minister of Israel on Al Jazeera, said in these beautiful camps that they're going to establish, refugee camps in the desert, so that they reallocate or relocate all these Palestinians to the Sinai temporarily. Wink, wink.
Right.
I mean, who are they fooling? You know, it's so clear what they're trying to do.
On the leaked documents that have come out that have all been verified. I mean, WikiLeaks has confirmed that it's a real document, but ultimately that it's every aspect of this plan is literally in effect and happening. So it's obviously they're not going to come back. They're trying to push them into the Sinai Desert. I mean, it's a very, all of which are war crimes, forced displacement. I mean, everything that's happening. But what's interesting to me, back to the topic we're discussing, is so what you're saying is two things. One, it seems like, which is just a classic seemingly Western kind of action to, we'll just murder this guy because it will give us political points, you know, like that kind of argument. So that seems to just be like a really basic concept that would line up with historical actions. But what would be the political benefit other than that? Is there anything in your mind other than just showing that they have power coming up in an election? What do you think it would accomplish even to assassinate Assad right now with the current dynamic?
There are many things they can accomplish if they assassinate Assad. First of all, they give the biggest service to Israel, which means if Syria falls, if Assad falls, the alternative is not 99%, it's 100% is going to be a friendly government to Israel and to the United States. Of course, if Assad falls, who is the opposition to Assad nowadays? All these talking heads on televisions, they are under the payroll of Qatar, they are on the payroll of the CIA and the payroll of the United States. And all these Soros organizations that are funding the independent journalists, independent politicians, we all know, like you go to their websites and just click on about or who is funding them, and you can see the foundations, all these foundations that are affiliated to NED, USAID, and all these Soros organizations, right?
Right.
The alternative to Assad is going to be a friendly government to the United States and to Israel. And this geographically means that the next government, if they manage to remove Assad from power, he will close the borders between in front of the Iranians. Because remember what the Americans are doing in Syria. They're not only stealing the oil, they have another military base on Al Tanaf border crossing. Why? Because they want to block Syria's trade routes and also the lifeline of Syria to the east.
Right.
And when they do that, they're blocking Syria this connection between Tehran, Baghdad, and Damascus and Beirut. So the Syrians opened a new border crossing in Al Bukamal. And remember, just a few days ago, when Biden gave the order to bomb Syria, they bombed exactly that border crossing because they want for this border crossing to be closed. And if this border crossing is closed, then Syria will no more be able to get any sort of aid, whether it is trade relationship or military aid from Iran. So that's going to be one of the things that they will block this, which means Hezbollah will be isolated, and eventually the Palestinian armed factions will be isolated. So this is the biggest service for Israel if they do that. The second thing, of course, for the United States, this is very, very important. If Assad is gone, Qatar will extend its gas pipelines through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Turkey to Bulgaria. And you will see that Qatar will provide the necessary gas that the Europeans need in the next years. And they will no more be in need for the Russian gas. Up until this moment, the Europeans are buying Russian gas from black market, from the Indians and from the Chinese with higher prices, and the liquefied natural gas from the United States. But if they can bring it from Qatar, cheap gas from Qatar, they will no more need. There is going to be no need for pipelines from Russia anymore. This is also the plan of the Americans, right?
Right. This is a really interesting. I've often made this point that at some point, there's these classic concepts like in Iraq that, it's a war for oil, which is never that simple, right? But these concepts were generally accepted. There's a huge factor there. But at some point along the line of conversation, everyone acted like, oh, that's passé. It's not about oil anymore. It's about X, Y, and Z. But it's never really been the case. Like what you're tapping, I mean, it is. There's a lot more moving parts to this. But oil and geostrategic control never stopped being wildly important to the dynamic. And so what you're highlighting here is that this is very clearly still tapped into these long-term plans about pipelines and control. And I guess what I'm saying is it's interesting how people act like that's not part of this. And we're looking to like biosecurity and, they're really there now, the Great Reset, and these things all overlap, but these parts still matter very importantly to the strategic control of the area. And so that's really fascinating to me, is that obviously isolating Russia in the same way and blocking them off for that. It's really important, I think. But I guess to my other point too is that, and it almost kind of explained it with your explanation there. I was going to ask, would that even deter Hezbollah? But your answer then is if they were able to accomplish that, it effectively would cause this cascade effect that would affect them. And so that's interesting. But still the same question. With all of that, do you think that will deter Hezbollah from entering something that it seems they're already very clearly involved in?
Hezbollah is directly already involved in this conflict.
Right.
They are firing the ATGMs like they are eating candies, and this is a really important question. If they fire 200 anti-tank rockets in the past few days on Israel, how many anti-tank rockets do they have? If I am in charge of the military affairs in Hezbollah and I don't have 20,000 units of this weaponry, I'm not going to fire 200 units in 2-3 weeks against the Israeli tanks and armored vehicles, right? So Hezbollah is already part of this conflict, but people need to understand what's the role of Hezbollah in this. The role of Hezbollah, from their perspective, of course, this is not my wishful thinking, I'm just analyzing. Hezbollah's role is to keep 1/3 of the Israeli army busy in the north and in southern Lebanon, in North Israel, southern of Lebanon. Because if the Israelis they called all their units to go to Gaza, they have around 350,000 soldiers, let's say, and now around 150,000 of them are busy in the north. Because if Hezbollah intervenes in this conflict, people need to know what Hezbollah is and how Hezbollah grew in the past since 2006. If they intervene and they wage a ground offensive, what we have seen from Hamas on the 7th of October, it's going to be like from a child playbook, as Scott Ritter said the other day. And he is correct on that, because Hezbollah are 100,000 fighters. They are ideologically very, very strong, and they are very, very disciplined, and they have a very long combat experience in Syria. 12 years of war in Syria against the most vicious terror groups in the world. And above all this, Hezbollah has anti-tank rockets, sophisticated ones. They have anti-aircraft missiles. They can gun down the F-16s of the Israelis. They haven't used it yet, but you will see it if there is a regional war. They have ship cruise missiles. They have Yachont. Yachont is a very sophisticated missile that the Syrians bought from the Russians, and then all of a sudden they end up in southern Lebanon. It's like everything we get from Russia in Syria, it goes to Hezbollah. And they're a very strong and disciplined army. I think if Hezbollah intervenes, Israel will need the intervention of the American forces.
Right.
And they will need it because Hezbollah and Syria, they are able jointly to neutralize the air bases of Israel. And if that happens, from where the Israeli warplanes will operate? From the American aircraft carriers, right? And this is one of the reasons why they are in the Mediterranean. So if that happens, we are faced with a regional war, and the regional war with global ramifications. And as I told you, the Russians already sent their message. Syria is a red line. Their presence in the Mediterranean is a red line. Assad is a red line, and they are ready to engage with the Americans through these hypersonic missiles. I think maybe it's just I'm being naive here. I think the Americans have no strategic interest at the moment for the war to expand. They don't want it. In my opinion, maybe I'm naive. I think the Israelis are dragging the Americans into this conflict, and they're bringing them. Yeah, I think so. I think the Americans are not ready to open big war in the region. All their interests in the Gulf, their companies, the flow of the energy resources from the Gulf countries, there will be huge financial crisis, energy crisis around the world. And the United States is already printing hell of a money to sustain its war machine, let's say, in Ukraine and now in Israel. So I think if there is a regional war, financially speaking, it's not in the interest of the United States to get involved in such a big war, because the economy will be exhausted, and we will see huge inflation in the United States. And at the end of the day, the Americans then need to have also air bridge to bring all the sort of weaponry to the Middle East, whereas the people of the region, they're there, their factories are there, their weaponaries are there. And it's quite obvious after this Gaza onslaught that even though some of the governments in the region, like in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the rest, are just being in the middle or sometimes pro-American, let's say, but the people in the region, the public opinion in the region it's so sharply now against the Americans and against the Europeans, something we haven't witnessed before. It was pretty obvious now that for the Americans and for the Israelis and for the Europeans, the Arabic people, they're just like flies. And if the Israelis kill now like 4,000 kids in 3 weeks in Gaza, and the American administration says there is no red lines, you can do whatever you want in the Gaza Strip, then this sends a clear message to the people in the region that the Americans are not their friends. I'm not talking about the ordinary people, but the deep state in the United States. They are very, very, very vicious, and they're trying to save themselves and keep their hegemonic status. And I think this is the beginning of the end of the American empire. I'm not saying that it will collapse, but they will not be able to rule the world unilaterally like they used to do in the past decades.
Yeah, I agree. And to your point about, the normalization deals, and I know we have limited time, Egypt is a good example of that, where, at least in my opinion, like in particular regarding Israel, where you have this extreme, like obviously pro-Israel stance from the government, from the elitist perspective, but the people, as far as I understand it, it's aggressively anti-Israel kind of, and that's the government again, not about, that they always try to make these about the people and the individuals because it pits us against each other. But I think it's interesting is even in regard to the entire current conflict in Israel, in occupied Palestine, is around the world. You're finding the example that you've got governments that are aggressively pro-Israel to the point to where they're calling it taboo to even call for a ceasefire, when you can prove that, at least in this country, it's 60% of every category is calling for ceasefire. So it's like they don't even care what people think. And I've always tried to make people see that. Now, just last question before I let you go here is that you mentioned the secret base as well. The U.S. The Intercept covered the secret base that the U.S. is building in or around Israel, close to Palestine, occupied Palestine. And so it's interesting to me that we talk about the assassination of Assad, but your point is that all of this being done and the aircraft carrier seems to almost be kind of like trying to taunt Iran into what's going on. But those in a way almost seem contradictory, right? Because if argument being that they would force them in if they took action with Syria, but they're almost kind of, so how do you see those playing together kind of in the last point? Do you think they want Iran to come in, or is that sort of a taunt to, how do you see it?
There is a contradiction between the statements and the actions. On one hand, they say for Iran, don't, this was the quotation, don't. And
Really
at the
stupid,
same
by the way.
time, yeah. And then Kamala Harris, she, oh my God. Like sometimes I wonder if the Americans know that their leaders have become the mockery of the world when they speak like that. They need to understand that the time has changed, and Iran is not afraid of the United States, and the rest of the people are not like intimidated by the United States. And the message was clear in the past 2 weeks. The American forces in Iraq, in Syria, and in every occupied areas, they came under fire. Up until today, they're firing against them. So this is the message from Iran. If the Americans will intervene, they will of course intervene in this conflict. The Iranians do not want to open a regional war in the region, but the flow of all these soldiers, special forces to Israel, the expansion of this secret military base near the Gaza Strip, bringing all these warships and aircraft carriers and nuclear weapons to the region again. I mean, those are not an indication that the Americans are willing to de-escalate in the region. They are getting ready. And as I said, this is not America's war. This is Israel's war, and the Americans are coming to help their ally. I don't want to say any other words, not to be fined here in Germany, but they're coming here in support of an occupation, illegal occupation. Under every UN charter, every UN resolution says Israel is an occupation force. And they are aiding this occupation, and they're aiding the murder of, look, I don't like to play sensationalism, but if you watch the footage from Palestine that on social media platforms, how can any person with the minimum humanity not feel sick in the stomach seeing all these kids, newborn babies are coming under the rubble, shattered bodies everywhere. And then with a straight face, they come to the media and they say, like, Israel is trying to minimize the civilian casualties. No, they're not trying to do that. They're trying to drag the Americans into this war. And I think the Americans understand that. And now we can see that they're speaking about the end of Benjamin Netanyahu's political career. But do not underestimate Netanyahu's psychopathy. He could drag the Americans into a war, and then we will see hell on earth in the region. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that, but believe me, after decades of intimidation and bulldogging against the people, like, what are you doing in Syria? Like, you're like a pirate, stealing the oil, blocking the trade routes of Syria, blocking the Silk Road initiative of China to reach to Syria. It's like you're just there to impoverish the people and keep them poor. And people know that. People are not stupid in the Middle East. If you ask anyone in Syria, like 100 people in the street randomly, you can speak with them the way we were speaking right now. People are educated. People know politics quite well, and people know what's happening, and they're fed up. Of course, they're angry at the government because the government cannot provide them with the basic necessities, but they also know the source of this misery, right?
I agree. I know you got a hard out in like 1 minute, so I don't want you to be late, but I will just end with the fact that I personally think that there are entities within this that definitely want some level of destruction and terror and horrifying things to happen. That's my personal opinion, but I think this comes from extremist elements within a lot of these Western governments, and it's a problem. We have Lindsey Graham literally saying it's a religious war, level it. I mean, come on, it's very clear where they're at least presenting themselves. But so I'm glad that we have people like you that can be analytical and objective and cover this information. So thank you for joining me, brother, and we'll connect again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, brother. I will always be in touch with you, and it is my pleasure to be with you.
Well, thanks, brother. And as always, everybody out there, question everything, come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.